3. The lost ship of the California desert. Legend holds that there's a treasure-laden ship hidden within California's Salton Sea Basin, which is part of the Sonoran Desert. Stories of its origins date back to 1862, with the first claimed sightings. A Los Angeles Daily News report from 1870 describes a half-buried ship that could be seen from miles away. One story identifies the vessel as the Content, which belonged to the English explorer and privateer Thomas Cavendish. According to another tale, the ship is a galleon left behind by Spanish mutineers. There are also rumors that it's a Viking ship. Numerous expeditions have failed to find the vessel, leading to claims that it must have sunk to the bottom of the Salton Sea. But there's a problem with this theory. While large inland seas have cyclically formed and dried up in the Salton Sea Basin throughout history due to overflowing from the Colorado River, the current body of water didn't exist until 1905. When people first began reporting sightings of a ship in the area, the basin was dry, and no lake had existed within it since prehistoric times, long before European explorers traveled to North America. The Salton Sea is also landlocked, meaning there's no way to access it from the ocean, which makes it pretty far-fetched to think that a Spanish ship had any reason to be in the region or any way to get to it. Some believe that the vessel could be a ferry or steamboat that got swept away from the Colorado River during a flood. But even this is highly unlikely, if not impossible. The sea is rapidly shrinking, and its current maximum depth is just 43 feet, 13 meters, less than the height of most ships. Yet there's no sign of the fabled vessel. During its heyday in the 1950s and 60s, the Salton Sea, which is actually a lake, became a popular resort destination among California's affluent residents, who were eager to escape their hectic everyday lives in Los Angeles and other populated areas. Yacht clubs, vacation homes, golf courses, and other amenities to keep vacationers entertained popped up along the Salton Sea's coast. And for a short while, boating and fishing were popular activities. But the lake's popularity among the who's who of SoCal didn't last very long. By the 1970s, the shoreline began to recede, and the lake started to stink like rotten eggs. Between having no outlet and serving as a reservoir for agricultural runoff, the Salton Sea became highly saline and polluted with fertilizers and other chemicals. The extremely dry and hot desert climate, along with a years-long drought that has plagued the American Southwest for decades, have only accelerated the speed at which the water is evaporating into the surrounding atmosphere. Tourists stopped coming, businesses closed, and resort communities became ghost towns. The changes went from off-putting to dangerous in the early 1990s. Fish died out in droves from botulism and other diseases. Birds died en masse from eating the infected fish, toxic algae blooms covered the water's surface, and the Salton Sea became uninhabitable for wildlife and dangerous for any sort of human recreation. The once bustling vacation communities came to resemble a post-apocalyptic wasteland. In 2012, the lake's foul odor wafted into areas as far as 150 miles, 241 kilometers away, including Los Angeles. As the lake got further and further away from the beachside resorts that once sat alongside it, the only things it revealed were animal carcasses and toxic dust. The wind started to blow the dust around, and the problem worsened as the water continued to evaporate, with devastating consequences to public health. Asthma, lung cancer, cardiac disease, and other ailments have spiked among the region's remaining population, the vast majority of whom are members of historically underserved minority communities. It's been years since the air quality met federal standards. Efforts are underway to combat the pollution. Restoring the Salton Sea to its previous levels or cleaning the area up would prevent the hazardous dust from entering the air, and there are numerous ideas being considered for the best ways to make the area safer. If by some chance there's really a lost ship lurking in the basin, there's a good chance it'll never be found, but finding it is most likely the least of concerns among the people who deal with the everyday realities of living near the Salton Sea. And even the most strong believers in the mystery ship's existence would probably change their mind about looking for it after getting anywhere near the sights and smells of the toxic reservoir that's become infamously known as California's worst ever ecological disaster. 2. A lost canyon. During the late 1950s, the Glen Canyon Dam was built on the Colorado River in northern Arizona, leading to the creation of America's second-largest artificial reservoir by maximum water capacity. Known as Lake Powell, the man-made lake straddles the Utah-Arizona border. It functions as a vital water storage facility for 4 states and is also a major vacation destination, attracting around 2 million visitors per year. But Lake Powell is rapidly shrinking. Part of this is caused by sediments that flow in from the Colorado River and settle at the bottom of the reservoir, depleting billions of gallons of water storage space every year since its creation. A severe chronic drought that started in 2000 and is still going on today has dramatically accelerated the water loss. Since the beginning of the so-called Millennium Drought, also known as the Southwest North American Mega Drought, Lake Powell's surface has dropped by 140 feet, 42.7 meters. Between 2020 and 2021, the water level decreased by 50 feet, 15.2 meters. As the shortage reached a crisis point in 2021, Utah Governor Spencer Cox said that only divine intervention could save Lake Powell, and encouraged believers of all faiths to pray for desperately needed rain. At the same time, parts of the Glen Canyon that hadn't been seen since before the reservoir was created became visible again. Writing for The New Yorker, Elizabeth Colbert described how one of the lake's most famous features, the La Gorce Arch, could be visited by boat in 2019, but was a half-mile, 0.8 kilometers away from the lake's shoreline just 2 years later. It's just one of numerous mesmerizing aspects of the landscape that have become increasingly visible in recent years. And it's also one of the reasons not everyone is terribly upset that the reservoir is disappearing. In fact, there's an entire movement to drain the lake and restore the canyon to its natural state. Known as the Glen Canyon Institute, it was founded in 1996, just a handful of years before the ongoing drought began. During a tour of Lake Powell with the organization's executive director, Eric Balkin, Colbert observed red cliffs rising up hundreds of feet on either side of what was once the Colorado River's main channel. They eventually hit water that was so shallow, they had to exit their boat and walk. The group visited a stunning rock formation called Cathedral in the Desert, which became visible in 2005 and again in 2019. Before the construction of the Glen Canyon Dam, the cathedral was a popular pilgrimage site among explorers, known for its domed ceiling and a waterfall that poured down into a shallow pool. When the water level began to drop, but the cathedral was still mostly submerged, it served as a recreational diving site. During her visit, Colbert encountered some visitors who, unlike her anti-reservoir tour guides, were sad to see the water disappearing. They told her that their visits to Lake Powell in recent years had become more and more disappointing, making it clear that they were less impressed by the emerging landscape than the activists campaigning to drain the reservoir. In all fairness, it may seem counterintuitive that anyone would be happy to see the reservoir shrinking, even if it means being able to enjoy the canyon's long-lost scenery. But the Glen Canyon Institute has other reasons for their agenda. When Lake Powell was created, it drowned countless habitats and the wildlife within them, killing some creatures directly and fatally depriving others of their food sources. These habitats are gradually returning, bringing certain life forms back to the area for the first time in decades. Archaeological sites left behind by Native Americans who lived in the area for thousands of years are also re-emerging. The canyon is filled with stone cliff dwellings, spiritual meeting places, grain storage structures, and other features of the indigenous communities who abruptly abandoned the canyon centuries ago for reasons that remain unclear to this day. What side of the debate are you on? Do you see the disappearing reservoir as alarming proof of worsening climate change? Or do you think it's best to take a hands-off approach and let nature take its course? Let us know in the comments below and hit subscribe while you're at it. 1. Roman and medieval ruins. Annual droughts have plagued vast swaths of the European continent in recent years, and they seem to be getting worse with time. The year 2022 saw the worst drought conditions in decades. Spain was among the hardest hit nations, thanks to a combination of unusually high temperatures and a devastating lack of rain. Some of the most shocking changes could be seen in the country's northwestern Galicia region, where reservoirs shrunk dramatically in size, revealing the ruins of settlements dating as far back as the 1st century and as recently as the 1990s. Included among the re-emerging villages is an ancient Roman military settlement called Aquis Querquenis. The site functioned as a barracks for the soldiers of the Legio VII Gemina Legion of the Roman Imperial Army. As many as 600 men were stationed at the camp during the construction of a road called the Via Nova. Also known as the Via 18, the 205-mile, 330-kilometer thoroughfare connected the cities of Bracara Augusta, known today as Braga, and Asturica Augusta, which is now called Astorga. It was built between 79 and 80 AD, under the rule of the Emperor Vespasian and his son Titus, who succeeded Vespasian as Rome's ruler after his father's death. Aquis Querquenis remained occupied until 120 AD, where the Legio VII Gemina was reassigned elsewhere. The unit abandoned the base, and it was soon forgotten about. Its ruins were discovered during the 1920s by local archaeologist Florentino Lopez Cuevillas, who carried out limited excavations at the site. In 1949, the Spanish government flooded the settlement to create the As Concas Reservoir. It was one of numerous dams that were built under the isolationist rule of dictator Francisco Franco, as a way to boost the country's ailing economy in the aftermath of a brutal civil war. Little thought was given to the fact that creating these reservoirs involved flooding historically valuable archaeological ruins, as well as the forced relocation of entire villages that were located within each reservoir's floodplain. Parts of Aquis Querquenis have appeared a handful of times since 1975 during periods of unusually low water levels. Archaeologists took advantage of these opportunities to further explore the site and learn more about it. Based on the findings, experts believe that the settlement is one of the largest Roman military camps in the Iberian Peninsula, consisting of a headquarters, 2 grain storage buildings, a hospital, 5 barracks, and the Viara Mansion, which housed traveling officials. Excavations have also uncovered roads, drains, towers, gates, walls, and a perimeter road. But researchers never got the opportunity to fully excavate the site because parts of it remained underwater even when the reservoir's water level dropped. They were only able to view Aquis Querquenis in its entirety through aerial photographs, which revealed a sprawling 5.9-acre, 2.4 hectares complex. During the record-setting drought that struck Spain in 2022, Aquis Querquenis was revealed in its entirety for the first time since before the reservoir's creation. Despite its archaeological importance, Aquis Querquenis was only designated a cultural heritage site, or Bien de Interés Cultural, in 2018. Visitors can learn about it at the nearby Aquae Querquenai Via Nova Interpretation Center, which houses a museum dedicated to the fort and the road built by the soldiers who were stationed there. There are also guided tours of the settlement, although the site's accessibility depends on the reservoir's water level at any given time. Around the same time that Aquis Querquenis became fully visible, the ruins of an 11th century church reappeared in the country's northeastern Catalonia region. Until the 1960s, the church was part of a village called Sant Roma de Sau. Like Aquis Querquenis, the town was submerged as part of Francisco Franco's ambitious dam-building program. Unlike the military complex, people were still living there when the decision was made to create the Sau Reservoir. Residents were left with no choice but to pack up and move, leaving the village uninhabited for the first time in over 1,000 years. They packed their valuables and even exhumed and reburied their dead before heading inland. The church's 3-story bell tower is normally visible, but the rest of the structure and all the other buildings nearby are typically underwater. During occasional periods of extreme drought, the church emerges entirely from the water. This happened in 2022, drawing a throng of curious visitors to the site. Due to their fragility, the ruins are fenced off to prevent members of the public from getting close enough to damage them. In the past, experts have attempted to fortify the crumbling structure with concrete, but it appears to be slowly losing its battle against the elements. And as long as it remains subjected to the reservoir's fluctuating water levels, it's simply not feasible to invest in restoring it to its former glory.
Number 6. Hashima Island, Japan. Japan's Hashima Island is located 9.5 miles from Nagasaki. The island is relatively small and sometimes goes by the nickname Battleship Island, thanks to its shape. It was once a bustling mining and industry hub, but now it's completely abandoned. Hashima Island was first inhabited in 1890, after being bought by Mitsubishi when a coal reserve was found on the island. The population rapidly expanded, spurred on by the wave of industrialization sweeping across the country. Hashima Island was so advanced that a 9-story concrete building was built on it in 1916, and many more soon followed to protect the workers and inhabitants from typhoons. But this advancement came at a high cost. Many of the buildings were made by Korean and Chinese prisoners that were forced into labor between 1930 and 1945. The conditions were so bad for these prisoners that many of them were worked to their deathbeds. The construction undertaken by the forced laborers meant that thousands of people were living on the island despite its small size. At the height of its occupation, Hashima Island was home to over 5,000, which meant there was only 5 feet of space for every person. By the 1970s, the coal reserves were practically exhausted, so citizens and workers slowly began to leave. By 1974, the island was pretty much deserted, and nature was starting to reclaim it as the concrete buildings began slowly crumbling down. With many people flocking to the island over the years to explore the abandoned settlement, the Japanese government made the decision to open it to the public, which allowed them to make the site safer, propping up buildings so they wouldn't collapse on passers-by. Hashima Island was even made a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2015, but not without protest from Korean people. Tourists today can explore an eerie location that looks like it has come out of a horror movie. But that's not where the spookiness stops. Despite there being no electricity, fishermen sailing by have reported flickering lights in some of the buildings. Some people who visit the island have even felt cold spots, as if they were being watched, or even invisible hands touching them. Number 5. Bhopal, India. On December 2, 1984, an event at the Union Carbide pesticide plant in Bhopal, India, would change the local landscape and lives of the people living there for good. An accident happened during the manufacturing process, which led to over 30 tons of toxic gases, including methyl isocyanate, to be released from the plant and across the surrounding area. The facility was not exactly an isolated area, since it was surrounded by shanty towns on all sides, densely populated by hundreds of thousands of people. Over 600,000 residents started to breathe in the deadly gases. Their throats and eyes began itching and burning, and many started feeling sick. Others suffered more severe symptoms, leading to blindness, and over 15,000 people lost their lives. This was not the end for the people of Bhopal either. Over the coming years, the contamination would lead to many babies and children being born with mental and physical health issues. Not only that, but it is believed that contamination of the groundwater in the area has also led to increased deaths and illnesses since 1984. The plant was eventually abandoned, turning into a rusting frame of iron and steel bars and pipes, becoming overgrown by vines and other plant life. After many protests against not only the current owners of the plant, Dow Chemical, but also Union Carbide, justice was finally served when on June 7, 2010, 26 years after the initial disaster, 7 former employees of Union Carbide were convicted of death by negligence. Number 4. River Country, Disney World, Florida. Abandoned theme parks always have an apocalyptic vibe about them and can definitely send a shiver up spines. But did you know that there is a deserted amusement park right next to one of the world's biggest and most famous resorts? River Country was the first water park ever opened near a Disney resort, and it welcomed visitors at Disney World Resort in Florida in June 1976. The park was themed after some old-fashioned swimming holes like those referenced in Tom Sawyer, with a pool filled with filtered water from the freshwater Bay Lake right next to it. It also pioneered the way for water parks of the future, with water slides, a lazy river, and a play area with swings and bridges to explore. Although it was a big hit at the time, River Country's downfall was due to its own success as a water park. More resorts opened up around the world, and Disney even opened 2 other water parks at the same site, Typhoon Lagoon in 1989 and Blizzard Beach in 1995. On November 2, 2001, River Country closed for winter maintenance like other attractions, but unlike the other parks, it did not reopen in the spring. Of course, with the closure, plenty of theories emerged as to why it shut down. One of the main ones is that it closed due to a brain-eating amoeba. Although an 11-year-old boy did die of amoebic meningoencephalitis contracted from the water, this was all the way back in 1980 and doesn't explain why the park would keep running for over 20 years afterwards. The most likely explanation is that it simply wasn't popular enough to stay open, especially after the decline in visitors to Disney World as a whole after the 2001 9/11 terrorist attacks. Instead of demolishing the park, Disney simply chose to fence it off, meaning that the attraction became famous amongst urban explorers wanting to see the deserted attractions. It would take almost 15 years before the lake was filled back in 2016, but as of today, there are still no signs of what might replace Disney's first ever water park. Have you ever heard of River Country, or did you visit it when it was open? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Number 3. Fordlandia, Brazil. Henry Ford was the visionary behind the first modern motor cars, but a lesser-known fact is that his vision also made a community in the Brazilian jungle. In 1928, Ford traveled to Brazil. Rubber was a breakthrough vital component when it came to manufacturing cars, much as it is today. Prices of rubber from Sri Lanka, where he originally sourced the material, were growing higher, thanks to the British monopoly over it. So the entrepreneur turned to Brazil for a cheaper, quick supply. Although it was closer and allowed Ford to ship the rubber directly to the manufacturing plant in Dearborn, Ford had a greater vision for his rubber plantation. He wanted to create a community based on his own ideals and values, Fordlandia. The city was split into 2 sections. One named Villa Americana was designated for American workers and had running water and scenic views. The Brazilian workers were housed separately, getting their water from nearby wells. Despite segregation, Fordlandia was rather advanced in its construction, with hospitals, schools, and even a water tower on site that loomed above the settlement as the most recognizable landmark. Ford's vision wasn't all that rosy though. It was hard to find people who wanted to work for him, thanks to the hard conditions, no matter the generous wages being offered. Many people also objected to the zero-tolerance policy on alcohol that was strictly enforced in Fordlandia, and the separation between skilled and unskilled workers led to friction between both sides, even resulting in a riot that forced many of Fordlandia's management to leave the area. Eventually, a new manager was brought in, Archibald Johnston, and the community began to flourish with paved roads, new housing, and more. Although the city itself went from strength to strength, the original reason for the venture, securing a supply of rubber, was not going according to plan. The rubber trees refused to take root in the Brazilian soil, and those that did suffered from blight and died before they could ever bear any produce. By the 1940s, Ford's health was slowly declining, and with the demand for military vehicles to support World War II increasing, it became up to his son Henry Ford II to take the reins of the family business. In an effort to streamline and cut losses, Fordlandia was one of the first things to be let go. Although the site was purchased by the Brazilian government and people over time made their homes there, it never returned to its former glory, with much of the manufacturing plant allowed to rust and decay. There is no longer a school or hospital, and at one point there were only about 100 people living there. In recent years, there has been a resurgence, with 3,000 people now calling it their home. with the water tower still standing to this day as a reminder of the failed social project of a great American industrialist. Number 2. Centralia, Pennsylvania. Centralia is in the middle of Pennsylvania, not the place you'd usually expect to find a ghost town, but it is abandoned for good reason, since there's a fire burning under the ground there to this day. Centralia was a mining town with 2,000 residents in its heyday. The massive coal deposits under the earth provided employment. The material gathered was shipped out all across the USA. Business was booming in Centralia until 1962. During a routine trash burning, the fire managed to light up a coal seam, starting a deadly blaze that, thanks to the endless supply of fuel, was unable to be put out. For most, these flames went unnoticed for years, and only as time dragged on were the full details uncovered. Various incidents happened around the town, such as in 1979, a gas station owner found his underground storage tanks 100 degrees higher than normal, and a few years later, a boy fell into a sinkhole caused by the fire. Thankfully, he survived. More and more residents started getting sick due to the flames, even getting carbon monoxide poisoning from the fumes. Slowly but surely, they started to move out, and buildings were demolished. Now Centralia looks like an apocalyptic landscape. Half of the town is covered by forest, while random walls and stairs can still be seen. The sidewalks are empty, and stop signs stand tall despite there being no cars for them to warn. Route 61 is a stretch of highway that runs for 3/4 of a mile through Centralia. Instead of being filled with cars, the tarmac is now home to countless pieces of graffiti. That's why it's called the Graffiti Highway. Down the middle of this disused road, you can see a massive crack caused by the fire's heat burning below ground. It was this crack that led to the highway being rerouted away from Centralia, reducing visitors even more. The only signs of life in town can be found in the 2 graveyards, which are kept neat and tidy, with green grass and intact churches nearby in respect to this ghost town's dead. It doesn't look like people will be living in Centralia again anytime soon. Scientists believe that there is enough coal underground to keep the fire going for another 250 years, which will put off any building projects for the foreseeable future. Number 1. Witten Australia. It's not often that an entire village is completely wiped off the map, but that's exactly the case when it comes to Witten in Western Australia. Even the road signs have its name slashed out, and for good reason too. The town is deadly. Witten was once a mining metropolis, but they were mining an incredibly dangerous substance, asbestos. To add to this, the type of asbestos found in Witten, crocidolite, is especially harsh. If it is breathed in, the fibers will fill the lungs, leading to aggressive cancers like mesothelioma, which is incurable. Usually those that have it only live another 2 years or so. One man who has a diagnosis of mesothelioma is named Maitland Parker. He was diagnosed back in 2016 and is defying all the odds. He's still alive today, partly, he believes, thanks to the fact that he needs to keep fighting for the people of Wittenum's justice. Before the dangers of asbestos were known, the community used to thrive. Not only did it provide jobs for many people, but the trailings and offcuts from the asbestos floated freely through the air and were used to build roads and children's playgrounds. Parker even remembers his brother chewing on some of the fragments as if it was chewing gum. Out of the 20,000 people that once called Witten home, 1 in 10 of them have died from asbestos-related cancer. The government made a call to buy up all the homes and make Witten a ghost town to prevent any more deaths. The entire area is now contaminated. Each footstep kicks up dust and asbestos fragments, and even the water has traces of the material. Today, only 2 people live in Witten, stubbornly refusing to leave. They are joined throughout the year by about 90 tourists who risk their lives to explore this lost town, despite the government's best efforts to keep them away. Former residents like Maitland Parker continue to campaign for the site to be completely cleaned to prevent any further deaths.
9. An experimental garden Off the coast of a small town called Noli in northwestern Italy, there's an innovative experiment that's testing the effectiveness of submerged greenhouses. The project is called Nemo's Garden, and it consists of 9 underwater plastic domes filled with hydroponic equipment, seeds, and air circulation fans. The domes are anchored at different depths between 15 and 36 feet under the surface. The inventor of these biospheres, Sergio Gambarini, described each dome as a miniature space station. He told National Geographic that his goal is to develop a way for people in environmentally and economically challenged areas to grow food without having to undergo the costly process of desalinating ocean water. Gambarini came up with the idea by combining 2 of his passions, diving and gardening, in a unique way. So far, the project appears to be going well, and the team has successfully grown basil, green peas, tomatoes, beans, and okra. Gambarini has also rented out some of the stations to researchers from the pharmaceutical industry who are exploring the potential capabilities of growing medicinal plants in the domes. In the meantime, he continues to experiment with the technology and hopes of fine-tuning the process of sustainably growing food underwater. 8. An out-of-place shark. Until recently, the elusive Greenland shark was most famous for having the longest known lifespan of all vertebrates, estimated to be anywhere from 250 to 500 years. To put that into perspective, a 250-year-old Greenland shark would have been born in the early 1770s, several years before the Founding Fathers signed the U.S. Declaration of Independence. A 500-year-old specimen would have been born in the early 1520s, just a few decades after the end of the Middle Ages. In recent years, scientists have taken a growing interest in this puzzling species, which is known to dwell in the frigid North Atlantic and Arctic Oceans. Measuring up to 23 feet long and weighing as much as 1.5 tons, Greenland sharks are the largest known fish found in the Arctic Ocean. But they're incredibly slow swimmers and are often blind due to parasites that attach themselves to the shark's corneas. The species feeds primarily on fish and squid, and experts were shocked to learn that they also sometimes scavenge horse, reindeer, and even polar bear carcasses. But the most recent discovery about this creature came in 2022, when a Greenland shark was spotted in the Western Caribbean, thousands of miles from its typical breeding grounds. A team of researchers led by Devanshi Kasana accidentally captured it while tagging tiger sharks with a team of fishermen off the coast of Belize. They were unable to collect a DNA sample, but they snapped photos of the specimen and consulted shark experts who agreed that it is most likely a Greenland shark. The wildly out-of-place sighting is causing experts to rethink their entire understanding of the Greenland shark. It seems as though these creatures never fail to surprise even the most experienced scientists, leaving them to wonder what they'll learn about the mysterious creature next. 7. Unidentified jellyfish. During a deep-water dive off the Newport, Rhode Island coast in 2021, scientists from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, spotted a blood-red jellyfish unlike anything they'd ever seen before. Using a remotely operated vehicle, they captured footage of the bizarre blob-like specimen at a depth of nearly 2,300 feet. Researchers believe the rare unidentified creature is a new species belonging to the genus Poralia, which is currently a monotypic genus, meaning it only has one species. The only other Poralia jellyfish that's known to exist is also found in deep waters throughout the world's oceans and is elusive and rarely seen. It's most frequently spotted in the Caribbean. An NOAA spokesperson told McClatchy News that the newly discovered creature has more tentacles than the already recorded Poralia species is known to have. The jellyfish was just one of several interesting and entertaining life forms the team observed during the month-long expedition. 6. Mysterious cairns. At the northern foot of the Alps in Central Europe, there's a body of water called Lake Constance, which straddles the borders between Germany, Switzerland, and Austria. In 2015, archaeologists discovered dozens of ancient cairns, or mounds of stones, at the bottom of the lake. Located 984 feet from the southern shore in Switzerland, they sit just 16 feet or less below the water's surface. Each cairn is several dozen feet wide and up to 6 feet tall, and they're arranged in a formation measuring 6.2 miles long. Researchers concluded in a 2021 study that the structures were not formed naturally, and they likely date back roughly 5,500 years to the Neolithic period. The cairns were built on dry land, but at some point the lake's rising water level submerged them. During a visit to the site, the team noticed piles of wood beneath the stones in what looked like cut marks from a stone axe. They believe that the structures may have been built by the same population who lived in a series of nearby pile dwellings on stilts, which are also submerged in Lake Constance. Like the cairns, the dwellings are also thought to date back to around 3500 BC, but unfortunately, next to nothing is known about the people who built either of the features, so as things currently stand, it's impossible to say with any certainty whether they were built by the same group or not. The society's culture, beliefs, lifestyle, and most other aspects of their day-to-day lives are a mystery. The purpose of the cairns is also unknown. 5. Blue blob creatures. During an expedition along the Caribbean seafloor in 2022, scientists from the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, unexpectedly encountered bizarre-looking blob-like creatures that they'd never seen before. They made the discovery off St. Croix in the waters surrounding the U.S. Virgin Islands, where they witnessed the motionless blue life forms at depths ranging between 1,335 and 2,005 feet. The team was live-streaming the dive when they first spotted the creatures, allowing their viewers to witness their fascination and confusion as they tried to figure out what the blue blobs were. Commenters were quick to chime in with their suggestions about what the organisms might be, including a soft coral, a sponge, or perhaps a type of gelatinous invertebrate known as a tunicate or sea squirt. The researchers' mission was to explore parts of the ocean that are still largely a mystery to scientists. They made no definitive conclusions about what the creatures were, likely because this was the first time they'd ever been observed. The blue blobs were just one among many bizarre life forms that the team witnessed during their 4-month-long expedition throughout parts of the North Atlantic. What do you think about the blue blob creatures that scientists observed in the North Atlantic? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. 4. Submerged salt lakes. While exploring the Red Sea in 2022, researchers from the University of Miami spotted rare underwater salt lakes known as deep-sea brine pools in the Gulf of Aqaba. Located more than a mile beneath the water surface, it marked the first discovery of its kind in the region. The team found the brine pools using a high-tech remotely operated vehicle, which enabled them to look in a place that they would never have been able to see otherwise. Marine geosciences professors Sam Purkis told Science Daily that they were incredibly lucky to make the discovery, which happened just minutes before the end of their 10-hour dive. He went on to explain that the brine pools may help scientists learn more about how the world's oceans formed millions of years ago. These extreme environments also contain information about tsunamis, flash floods, earthquakes, and other weather events that occurred thousands of years ago. The discovery could also potentially teach experts about the possibility of life on other planets. Purkis said that until researchers know the limits of life on Earth, it will be difficult for them to know if any other planets are capable of hosting life forms. Brine pools have high salinity and unusual chemical makeup. They're also entirely devoid of oxygen, making them one of the most extreme environments known to humans. Despite these conditions, the brine pools in the Gulf of Aqaba are teeming with microbial organisms. In addition to the potential to learn more about the world's early oceans and extraterrestrial life, researchers believe they may contain microbes with cancer-fighting properties. 3. A deep-sea creepy crawler. Deep-sea creatures who live in the ocean's pitch-dark abyssal zone are often distinctly larger than their shallower dwelling counterparts. Because it's difficult to conduct research at such depths, this tendency known as deep-sea gigantism isn't fully understood by scientists. However, there are numerous proposed explanations for what causes it, including colder water temperatures and food scarcity. But it could also be due to the fact that these creatures have fewer predators than related species that live at shallower depths, and the deep sea's increased dissolved oxygen content. One of the most striking examples of deep-sea gigantism can be observed among giant isopods, which measure 3 to 6 inches, and supergiant isopods, which are anywhere from 6.7 to 19.7 inches long. They bear a striking resemblance to the woodlouse, their much smaller terrestrial relative. With armored bodies and 14 legs, nightmarish would also be an appropriate term to describe the creature's appearance. In 2022, Taiwanese genetic researchers Huang Ming-chi discovered a new species of giant isopod. He ran a DNA sequence on a specimen at a Japanese aquarium, expecting for the results to reveal that it was a member of the largest known species, Bathynomus giganteus. But the findings were unfamiliar to Huang. who initially assumed that the DNA sample was contaminated. Then he ran the test again with a sample that he knew wasn't contaminated, but he got the same results. As it turned out, the creature was a previously unknown species. Huang and his colleagues named the new isopod Bathynomus yucatanensis, after Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, where it was captured in 2017. It joins the ranks of the 20 or so known giant isopod species. The specimen Huang studied is 10 inches long and 5 inches wide, roughly 25 times the size of an average woodlouse. Researchers believe that there are likely more undiscovered giant isopod species throughout the world's oceans, along with other creatures lurking in the abysmal depths that humans rarely get the chance to explore. 2. Mammoth Tusk. A team of scientists were exploring the Pacific floor in 2019 when they spotted a mammoth tusk 10,000 feet below the water's surface. They were 185 miles from the coast and couldn't figure out how or why the tusk of an ancient land mammal would end up so far out at sea. The team collected the tusk and determined that it belonged to a Colombian mammoth that died around 100,000 years ago. It would be extremely rare to find a tusk this old on dry land, making it even more amazing that it was found in such an unlikely place. Even more remarkably, it wasn't destroyed or buried, and it was incredibly intact, likely due to the dark, frigid, and nearly oxygen-free conditions it was found in. It's been said that the tusk might be even the most well-preserved mammoth tusk ever found in that part of North America. Shortly after the discovery, researchers said they hoped the tusk would help them learn more about mammoth lineages and that they planned to run CT scans in an attempt to obtain a DNA sample. The findings could prove to be especially valuable because Colombian mammoths were a hybrid between two different species. However, scientists know very little about their origins or when the hybridization began. 1. An ancient landslide. Around 500 years ago, a major underwater landslide occurred in the northern Red Sea's Gulf of Aqaba. This event triggered a catastrophic tsunami that shifted the seabed, causing a reef slope to drop several meters and become stuck beneath a pile of overhanging rocks. Modern researchers only learned about these catastrophic events in 2022, when geoscientist Sam Purkis and his colleagues spotted an enormous break in the seabed, roughly 3,000 feet below the water surface, during a deep dive in the region. They took a closer look and observed a gaping 15-foot deep fissure running along the seafloor. Purkis later said that he could tell that a tremendous geological force had caused the break. In a study to determine what ripped the bottom of the sea apart so violently, he and other researchers discovered evidence of the landslide and tsunami that occurred half a millennium ago. Computer simulations suggest that the ancient landslide may have produced a 30-foot wave, which would have been extremely deadly to coastal communities. The team's findings conclude that there's a possibility that a similar series of events could happen in the future. In fact, the rock wall that formed as a result of the last catastrophic landslide could possibly fall and trigger another massive tsunami, one much larger than the tsunami that happened 500 years ago. And because the coastline is much more populated now than it was back then, the damage would likely be nothing short of cataclysmic. The effects could devastate beachside communities in Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Israel, none of which have an effective early warning system for earthquakes and tsunamis. Purkis strongly recommended adopting these potentially life-saving measures, especially because the region sees a lot of seismic movement, and it wouldn't take much to cause the overhanging rock wall to collapse. If you were snorkeling, would you rather encounter a sea turtle or a dolphin? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.